Hello everyone and welcome on into the next video here in survey. So in the last video we had an overview of all the regions of the brain, and in this video now we're going to be continuing with the central nervous system and going into the anatomy of the spinal cord, which of course is still CNS. So in this video here we're going to look at spinal cord function. We're going to be looking at the difference in white matter, gray matter. We're going to briefly talk about reflex arcs. We're going to talk about the different parts of the spinal cord, so the dorsal root, the horns, associating neurons and how they work, ventral roots, ascending tracts, and descending tracts. So here first, the spinal cord. This is just an artistic representation. So what I'm going to show today is this representation, and then I also have a classroom model. We're going to show the spinal cord. There's different layers of protection around it as well. And then we're going to be showing full gross anatomy of the spinal cord here as it travels down in the vertebral column in the different regions. Alrighty, so here for the spinal cord, it's kind of the opposite of the brain. The brain, the cortex, has gray matter outside, white matter within. In the spinal cord, this is all white matter right here. Within the white matter, so there's these posterior or dorsal columns, and then down here there's the ventral columns, and then there's lateral columns as well. What these columns are referring to the ascending and descending tracts. There are little pockets of descending tracts within here as well. So white matter is myelinated, meaning it's traveling a further distance. So more heavily myelinated means it's traveling further and faster. So when information comes in, it comes in this dorsal side, this dorsal horn here. So inside the spinal cord, there are three horns. There's the dorsal horn, that's the lateral horn, the lateral horn, and then the ventral horn. And so these three horns on all sides here, you get information coming in here. It could synapse in here and then travel somewhere else, or it could turn and then travel up to the brain. And we'll talk about those pathways and how we go in and out. And then there's a bridge that connects the left and the right, and then there's a central canal in the middle where you also find cerebral spinal fluid. This bridge from left to right is called the gray commissure. So you have association tracts going to the other side, and those are important in things like reflex arcs and whatnot, where you need to withdraw. So in the next video after this, we're going to be going over reflexes and some of those arcs. All right, so that didn't label too much there in that image, so we're going to add a little bit more than what the textbook did here. Here's a histology image showing the white matter on the outside and the gray matter. It almost looks like a butterfly or a moth on the inside here, so it's kind of neat on the structure of the gray matter inside. Alrighty, now here we have two representations. One is within a vertebrae, and the other one is out. And I like to orient myself on the dorsal side here. So here you do have a spinous process on a vertebrae, and that's on the dorsal side. Those are the bumps you feel on your back. So as a sensory input comes in here, it goes through what's called a unipolar neuron and synapses, and well, not synapses, and has its cell body in what's called the dorsal root ganglion. So that's labeled there and there, dorsal root ganglion. And then it comes in the dorsal root, and then separates into all these little structures here called the dorsal rootlets. And then they all come in this region where you have the dorsal horn. And like I said, here is the lateral horn, and then down here would be the ventral horn. So you have the different horns within. You have those same three horns down here as well. They're just a little bit more covered up and difficult to see in that one. Those horns become a little bit more important when talking about the pathways things come through. So let's say we are information coming in right here. We get a synapse that could occur in that dorsal horn, and say it's a reflex. If it's a reflex, it can travel then down to the ventral horn, synapse again, and then go out a motor neuron out the ventral rootlets through the ventral root, and then go out to a muscle for motor function. And that would be like a quick withdrawal reflex. Say you touch something hot, boom, you reflex away. And any somatic motor output exits the ventral horn. Any autonomic visceral output exits the lateral horn. And so those would synapse there instead. So that's autonomic, your autonomic nervous system. So any reflexes there, anything like that, would synapse in that lateral horn. So that's really the only significance of that lateral horn. Most stuff will be exiting via the ventral horn or having the synapse there in that ventral horn. And then, so that's the simple pathway going through. It could also go, again, across this gray commissure, which is the bridge to the other side, synapse over here, and then send a motor output that way as well. Or it can turn off and go up the tracts as well, or it could be information coming down. And then it could synapse on its way down and then travel out as well, which is also a possibility. Just wanted to change something on a screen over there that was distracting me. Sorry. Okay, now let's look at the structure inside here. Over here, I have the central canal, and then here's the gray commissure again. You got the different horns. This is the ventral median fissure, so it's a little deep, and this is the dorsal median sulcus, not labeled on this. One thing this image does show are the layers of protection. There is a delicate covering directly over the spinal cord. It's called the pia mater. Here's a space then it's called the subarachnoid space, and this little part right here is the arachnoid membrane. And so there's these little fibers in here, almost like a spider web, that help support not only the brain, but also the spinal cord. And then there's a layer out here called the dura mater. So right here would be the dura mater, and that's a protective coating, a very tough connective tissue. Then here is a fat layer that's found, and it's on the dura mater, so it's epidural. That's the epidural space. It's where epidural is given. And so those are the protective layerings helping support the spinal cord. Now, if we look down here, we can see as the spinal cord works its way down through the different regions, there's the cervical vertebrae, and that's the cervical enlargement. There's also the thoracic region right here. Now, there's no enlargement. So when we say enlargement, the spinal cord gets a little larger there because in the cervical region, you have the cervical plexus and the brachial plexus, which bring a lot of information in. So that region's a little thicker. Thoracic region's a little bit more simpler in terms of the information coming in and going out. And then down here is the lumbar region. Lumbar region also has an enlargement as well for that lumbosacral plexus. And down here is the sacral ones. There are 31 pairs that are coming in and out. Now, spinal cord technically terminates at like L1, L2 at this part right here called the conus medullaris. And then it becomes all of these little hair-like structures, which are just the nerves coming down. It looks like a horse's tail. This is referred to as the cauda equina. And then there's a connective tissue down the middle of this called the filum terminale as well. So those are just some structures you get at the end that are different than the normal spinal cord. And also it's showing some of the protective layerings here as well. Of course, all those areas. You got the blood vessels and things like that for nourishment and support. But now let's say you get poked right here on the shoulder. Someone pokes you right there. You get a sensory neuron that sends that information in, and it travels along the nerve, so axillary nerve coming don't worry about the different nerve names right now. It comes in, and then that information will then go up the ascending tracts, no synapse yet, go up the ascending tracts and go to the medulla oblongata, which is right up here. It would then synapse in the medulla oblongata. And then from there, it would synapse in the thalamus. And then from the thalamus, it will go up to your somatosensory cortex and synapse again. So there are only 2 synapses for sensory information coming up to the brain. Now let's say your motor output going out, starting up here in the primary motor cortex. These are your corticospinal tracts or the pyramidal tracts. They can travel all the way down. So traveling all the way down, and so also I drew this kind of incorrectly here. In the medulla oblongata, this would actually cross over here, and it would be on the opposite side. So remember, the contralateral, if it's on this side of the body where the sensory input is, your brain is reading it on that side. So same thing over here. If we have a motor output initiating here, coming down, it crosses over, typically in the medulla oblongata in these areas called decussation pyramids. It then travels down and then can synapse at the level it's going out, and then go out and then cause a muscle to contract. So usually it's two up and only one synapse. And there could be a couple interneurons within the gray matter of the spinal cord for then sending that information out then. So typically we say two up, one down for this action right here. And it could vary. There are some different pathways. I was just showing one example of a pathway here and how you do get that crossing over. So like I'm touching my right pinky, but that's being activated in my left brain on that sensory information. So yep, that short little video here going over the anatomy of the spinal cord and basic idea of the pathway coming in through the dorsal side, through the dorsal horn, and then if you are a reflex exiting out, you exit through that ventral horn out the ventral side and then go to where you need to go. We talked about how you can ascend up the spinal cord to the brain or descend coming down, and how you can communicate through the spinal cord to the opposite side of the body, which will come back for the reflex arcs next chapter. Not next chapter, next video. But that's all I have for today. If there's, there's other things you could talk about here. Let's say there's damage to this ventral horn. If you damage this ventral horn, you get no motor output. But let's say you damage that corticospinal tract coming down, or primary motor cortex is damaged. You get damage there. However, you can still have reflex activity, and your muscles is called spastic paralysis. Spastic paralysis is where your muscles can still contract, but only reflexes can cause them to contract. You have no voluntary motor control of those muscles. So no primary motor cortex can initiate the contraction of those muscles. So there you can see one little difference in things that could affect the motor output from this ventral horn for the output, where if the damage is in this ventral horn, or the motor fibers exiting from it, that would be flaccid paralysis, and where you would lose all movement in that muscle, and the muscle would completely atrophy then over time. You wouldn't even have reflex action in that muscle. But yeah, that's all I have for this video again. Just a quick overview of spinal cord anatomy. Like always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and let me know. But hope you have a great rest of your day, and bye-bye.